Hi everybody. So today I'm going to do a video that will recap what's happened over the past couple of days in Parliament and the number of votes and amendments that have been laid down and that have happened. This is hugely complicated. So during this video I'm going to read a lot of what I'm going to tell you. So it might look a bit weird, but I need to read it because it's really complicated and I need to keep it straight in my head. Where we're going. So what I'm really interested in talking about is where I think we're heading and how I think we can achieve a people's vote when that's going to happen. Sorry, let's call it a ratification referendum. I know people hate the term people's vote, so we'll call it a ratification referendum. And so I'm going to talk about how I think this is going to happen. Now it's important to note that today, it's Thursday the 14th today. So today there was a vote in Parliament about having a people's vote or having a ratification referendum, and that was defeated. I think it was 80 to something like 300 or 400. 300 I think it was. Anyway, it was defeated decisively, and that was because Labour whipped to abstain. So the only people that were actually voting for it were the Lib Dems, the SNP, the independent group and the Nationals. So he was always going to be defeated, but I'm really not worried about that. I know a lot of people are panicking about that, but it was of no consequence really, because today was never the right day to actually do that, and I'll explain why I think that's the case. What was probably more important today was the Cooper and Ben amendment, which would have allowed Parliament to take back control from the Prime Minister of the Brexit process, and that would have resulted in a series of indicative votes next week to try and determine what kind of deal Parliament could coalesce around. Now that was defeated by the government, so the government keeps control of Brexit, but it was defeated by two votes. It was so close. So it's obviously a huge relief to Theresa May, but it shows just how close this all is. And ironically, it was actually six Labour MPs that voted for the government to keep control of the process, which baffles me. But there you go. I mean, I know a lot of people say that the Labour position is very clear on Brexit, but I'm not going to lie. I have some issues with it. Anyway, let's not go down that road. So that's today. Now, really, where we are now is that the government's main motion was passed, which means that Article 50 is now going to be extended, and this is on the assumption that Theresa May still gets passed. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to recap what happened yesterday, because this is now relevant. It relates to what happened yesterday. And I'm going to have to read most of this. As I say, it's so complicated that I don't want to miss anything. Anyway, so here we go. So it's now clear that no deal Brexit has been rejected by Parliament. It was rejected decisively yesterday, which is great, except it changes very little because as it stands, we're still on course for a no deal because it's currently written in law. So that's regardless of whether we were to leave at the end of this month or May or June. That's still the trajectory we're heading. And so this leads to the question, how can Parliament stop it? Now, the only way is to either agree a deal with the European Union or revoke Article 50 unilaterally. Now, revocation, that isn't a serious prospect at the moment, so that leaves agreeing a deal. The only problem is Parliament has not yet said what it would agree with. Now, Theresa May is going to put her withdrawal agreement back to Parliament for a third time next week. However, and this is quite interesting, parliamentary precedent states that the Speaker can prevent that from happening if it hasn't been altered because the House has already expressed its view. So it's down to John Bercow's discretion. But given his past performance, there is a chance he could simply refuse to allow it, which would leave us in a situation where I think Parliament would have to then stage another series or a series of indicative votes at that point to determine what kind of deal could command a majority in the House. Now, I think if Theresa May's deal is voted down next week, let's assume she puts the deal to Parliament. If it's rejected again, then we will at that point have the indicative votes. The only problem is that they will be controlled by the government, whereas if the Cooper-Benn-Bowles amendment had succeeded today and hadn't been defeated by two votes, then it would have been Parliament that would have determined how this worked. So anyway, so assuming May does put a deal to the House next week, then it's still unlikely that it will be passed. I say unlikely; it's unlikely at the moment. And even if it is, it will only pass by a tiny majority. That's significant because passing the deal, contrary to what you might believe, passing the deal is actually just the very beginning of this whole thing, because she would need to get a whole series of hugely complex legislation through Parliament to enable it to work. Now, if she's working on a very, very tiny majority, then it's obviously going to be massively problematic. So what May did yesterday was that after she was defeated yesterday, May she threatened a long extension to Article 50, to possibly up to 2 years, in order to put pressure on the European Research Group, Jacob Rees-Mogg, etc., to coalesce around her deal. Now, the problem the ERG have is their stance and their support base is a fanatical Brexit purity without compromise, which means even if they want to support her deal, many of the ERG members will be unable to do that for fear of being labelled a traitor by the people that support them. So it's almost like their fanaticism has backed themselves into a corner. Now, weirdly, the European Research Group have their own whipping system, so it is basically a party within a party. But I understand that the ERG are going to allow a free vote on May's deal if it goes back to Parliament. So it's going to be very interesting to see how many of the ERG actually peel away to support Theresa May's deal, or how many remain steadfast and they vote against it. Now, let's assume. So basically, things aren't lost for the ERG. And here's the reason. Because even though on the face of it, yesterday, it seemed like they had lost with regards to crashing out with no deal, they actually didn't. As I said before, the trajectory we're currently on is towards a no deal. Now, Donald Tusk today has said he is going to push the European Union member states to agree a long extension. However, that requires unanimous agreement for that to happen. There's also been, it's also a fact that Nigel Farage, Aaron Banks, etc., have been working behind the scenes to get the Italian five-star movement to force the Italian vote to reject any request for an extension, and they may well win. Because you have to remember that in order to get an extension, it has to be unanimous. All member states of the European Union have to unanimously agree to that happening. And it's a bit weird, really, that Farage, etc., have accused others of conspiring with foreign powers, yet they're quite happy to do it themselves. But there you go. So even if Theresa May doesn't win and the long extension is granted, even if Farage and the Brexiters, etc., don't win, in other words, they don't get the Italians or whoever to veto an extension, and a long extension is granted, I think that could be the ERG's best hope for a no-deal Brexit, especially if they could get that as an option in any future referendum. Because I still think there is, well, yesterday proved that there was no majority in Parliament for a no-deal Brexit. And I still think that somehow Parliament will, be it through Theresa May's deal passing or some other mechanism, either through the indicative votes, no deal will be taken off the table. But if there's a long extension, that could actually play out well for the ERG and the Brexiters, because they could use that to galvanise public opinion and to either push for a no deal at the end of the period, because you would have had 2 extra years to prepare for that, or they could push for it to be part of any kind of ratification referendum, as an option on any ratification referendum. Now, going back to a deal with the Commons can agree on with significant majority, it's clear the only way to do this is a cross-party solution. However, that would mean Brexit wasn't simply a Tory issue, and people could quite rightly lay any blame for future problems at the feet of the Labour Party also. So this would split the Labour Party in the same way it would split the Tory Party, and at the moment I don't see any will in either of those parties to allow it. And I think you can see at the moment Labour really trying to keep their hands away from it, but they're obviously going to have to at some point come down and support something. Anyway, so what do I think is going to happen? As it stands, I don't think Theresa May's deal will pass next week. I don't think enough ERG members will peel away to support it. I think she will lose by less, but I still don't think it'll be a majority. It is possible that through indicative votes that happen as a result of Theresa May's deal not passing, we could move towards some kind of Norway plus style deal, and I think that could be Parliament could possibly coalesce around that. And that would be an agreement where we stayed in the single market and the customs union. Now, arguably, that was what we should have probably always done after the referendum in 2016, given the closeness of the result. But that's ancient history now. I do think it is likely that the EU will offer an extension to Article 50, and all of Nigel Farage's attempt to try and get a member state to veto it, I think that will fail. But I think it'll have to be a long one, and we would have to take part in the European Union elections. During this time, there could be a general election or a ratification referendum. I think this is the point where a people's vote, a ratification referendum, really starts coming into play. Because the thing with this referendum, and a lot of people I think are possibly confusing this, the referendum is about ratifying the Brexit deal with an option to remain. It's not a solution to Brexit. You can't have a referendum with just one option in it. So you can't have a referendum with remain on it, for example. You need to have that second option. And I think this is possibly why people are panicking about the vote today, where the vote was rejected and where Labour abstained, because they were thinking, oh, this is our chance to do it. Well, it wouldn't have worked because there's no deal to have on that referendum. So I think it's during this this extension period that is the point where MPs will coalesce around this idea. I think also public opinion will start shifting heavily towards this, and I think that is the point when we will have a ratification referendum. That said, there is going to be an amendment tabled soon that will suggest that Theresa May's deal is passed with the support of the Labour Party, whether it's in agreement with the Labour leadership or allowing Labour MPs to support it, on the proviso that it gets put to the people in a ratification referendum. Now, I think this is a significant amendment that it will come up over the next few weeks. So if that happens, then all of what I've just said doesn't count, because although we will still need an extension to allow the referendum to take place, probably of up to a year, you wouldn't need to do the indicative votes, and the ERG would have been trumped at that point. The whole thing would be wrapped up in this deal. That's the thing that I really hope is going to be passed. But on today's performance, I'm not sure that there's the will in Parliament to allow that to happen. But we'll see. I mean, things are shifting so quickly now that it's really hard to keep a handle on what's actually happening. So don't lose hope about a people's vote. Don't lose hope about a ratification referendum. I still believe it's going to happen. And I think there's several different routes that it could happen, be it through this amendment I just talked about, or be it during an extension period. And if you want this to happen, then now, right now, is the time to make yourself heard. So many people, they want it to happen, but they're quiet. They don't really want to get involved. But you really need to start getting involved. You really need to start making your voice heard, whether it's emailing your MP or at the very least, if you can, come on the march on the 23rd in London, because it's going to be huge. And I think the more people we can get there, the more pressure it's going to put on people. People won't simply be able to say the will of the people is just to get on with it. You know, these platitudes are said all the time by Brexiters, and they're complete rubbish, because we are still trying to fight for the country that we want, and we don't want to be ignored. You know, we're 48%, we're probably well over 50% now, well over 50%, I would imagine, and we need to make our voices heard. Don't lose hope, get involved. Thanks very much.